Hello everyone and welcome back. This is Level 2, Lesson 5 of the Box Video Tutorials.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Box Video Tutorials. In this session we'll be creating a new OAuth 2 application using C#, .NET Core, and Web API. At this point you've already gone through the process of setting up the .NET SDK in Visual Studio Code. That's where we're going to start off. In front of you is the contents of the values_controller.cs file underneath the controllers directory. We have a number of includes at the top. The main route that we're working with is route. We have a simple method to fetch our configuration options, which will come from appsettings.json and contain our client ID, client secret, and redirect URI. Then we have two simple routes that are set up, start and return. When the user hits the start endpoint, they will be redirected to Box in order to accept the permissions of the application to do things on their behalf. When the user accepts those permissions, they are forwarded back to the redirect URI that we specify, at which point we capture the code that's passed along with that redirect URI, exchange it for an access token, and we will use that to create a new client to upload a file for the user. Let's get started by creating a new config and client object within our configuration method. First, we specify our config, boxconfig, config equals new boxconfig. And the boxconfig method takes in a few parameters: our client ID, our client secret, as well as a new URI of our redirect URI. Using that config object, we can create a new box client. We specify box client equals new box client, and then add in our new config object that we just created. We'll then return these two objects for consumption within the start and return endpoint by specifying return tuple.create, passing in our config and our client. That will make these two objects available for our endpoints. Next, let's set up the start endpoint. First thing that we need to do is capture the config object from our box config. So we can specify var config equals build config dot item 1, which will pull the first item from my tuple. Then we can use the redirect URI baked in that config to redirect the user. We specify return redirect config.authcode URI .toString, and that will pull the redirect URI out of the config object and redirect the user. The user will now be redirected to Box in order to accept the permissions of the application to do things on their behalf. Once they accept those permissions, they will be redirected back to the return URI that we specified. Let's go ahead and set up that return endpoint now. We're first going to extract the client from our build config by specifying var client equals build config dot item 2, which will be my client object. We then extract the code parameter that's passed along the query string of our redirect URI by specifying var code equals request.query, passing in the code. We then authenticate the client by exchanging the code for an access token. We do so by specifying await client.auth.authenticate async, passing in our code. At this point, we should have an authenticated client, which we can now use to upload a file for the user. Let's create a new box file object. Box file, new file. Next, we have to set up a file stream in order to read in the local tax.txt file that we have stored in the same directory. We do so by specifying using file stream equals new file stream, passing in our local file tax.txt with a file mode of open. Next, we set up a new box file request, box file request equals new box file request. Within the box file request, we can specify the name of the file as well as where it will be uploaded. Specify the name by adding in name equals taxdoc.txt. Then we can specify the folder that it will be uploaded to by saying parent equals new box request entity, passing in the ID of the folder. For the sake of this sample, let's upload to the root directory by specifying 0. The last item we need to do is upload the new file. We would add in new file equals await, and using our client, we can pull the file manager .upload async, passing in a request object and the string. And for the sample, instead of displaying something on screen, let's go ahead and just console log out the file ID. console.out.write, passing in the new file .id. For the last item, we can uniquely identify the GET request by adding an input to our return value. With that in place, we have everything we need in order to run our application. Let's go ahead and go to a terminal window. In front of us, we see our application structure, and to begin our application, we specify .NET Run. We can see our application is running on localhost port 5000. Now let's go to a browser window to hit the route/start endpoint to begin the application. The user will be forwarded to a screen like this to accept the permissions of the application. We grant access to Box, and then we'll be forwarded back to the return endpoint that we specified. Since we are just displaying the file ID using console out and not displaying anything to the screen, let's go back to the terminal window to see if that was successful. As we can see from the console, the file ID has indeed been output. To verify, let's go ahead and go to our box.com account for that user. If we refresh, we can see that the tax doc has indeed been uploaded. And with that, you have everything you need in place in order to create your first OAuth 2 application.